Seches Yoma Daf Yudches discusses the procedure that the Kohen Haggadah went through on Erev Yom Kippur as he prepared for the actual great holy day of Yom Kippur and the avoda that he was going to do on it. And the main goals which we have laid out in the Daf, which begins with a Mishnah and ends with a Mishnah describing the steps we take. The goals are that he know the halachos, that he be well versed in them, he knows what he's supposed to do, that he be used to it so that he doesn't falter, that we know that we can trust him, that he'll do it properly, and that he's not going to have a tumah incident. He will not have a sleeping time, a seminal emission, and in order to make sure that that doesn't happen, we avoid giving him foods that may cause a riboy of zera, and we want him to avoid sleeping, so we're going to try to keep him awake. So the first Mishnah begins, and it says that after the 7 days are coming to a close, the 7 days before Yom Kippur, and it's Erev Yom Kippur, we give him over to the care of the elders of the Beis Din, and they teach him the order of the avoda of the day. They read the parsha in front of him, and they teach him everything that he needs to know, and then they tell him, Ishi Kohen Gadol, my master Kohen Gadol, read it yourself, learn it yourself, just in case you forgot it, or in case you never learned it. Gemara will explain why they say that. Now, on Erev Yom Kippur itself, in the morning, we stand in front of the eastern gate of the Beis Hamikdash, and we pass before him 3 types of animals: oxen, rams, and sheep. Other types of sheep, those are the types that he'll use for karbanos. That's in order for him to focus, to see each one, to focus on the halachos that he needs to do for each one, and remember and review all the halachos that are relevant to each one. Now, the Gemara, the Mishnah adds here that all the 7 days that he was in isolation, we did not limit any of his eating or drinking. We gave him full amount of eating and drinking. On an Erev Yom Kippur, towards evening, we didn't want him to eat too much, because somebody who eats a lot becomes tired, and that'll make him fall asleep, and he's supposed to stay up all night on the night of Yom Kippur in order that he not fall asleep and have an emission while he's asleep. So the Gemara begins now, and the Gemara first of all discusses why do we tell him just in case you didn't learn it, that he might have forgotten. Okay, that I understand. People forget things, but he didn't learn. The Kohen Gadol is supposed to be a Talmud Chacham. How could you say that he never learned Hilchos Yom Kippur? He doesn't know about the Avoda. The Gemara quotes a brayso which says that the Kohen Gadol Me'echav, the pasuk calls him Kohen Gadol Me'echav, a pasuk in Vayikra. Why is he called that? Because he has to be greater than the other Kohanim, greater than his brothers. He has to be stronger, healthier, has to be more handsome, has to be wiser, and he has to be richer. He's got to be greater in all these ways in order to qualify to be the Kohen Gadol. And if he's not greater, if he's not richer, then the other Kohanim have to donate to him so that he becomes richer. So Gemara says, so it's a problem. How can he be somebody who doesn't know? You see, he has to be a Chacham. So Gemara says it's not a contradiction. In the first Beis Hamikdash, Kohanim were appointed based on merit, and therefore they were Chachamim. In the second Beis Hamikdash, many of them bribed their way into the job, and therefore they were not Chachamim, and it's highly possible that he didn't know anything, and he never learned, and he was an Amaretz. The Gemara proves it by quoting that Marta Bas Baisus, who was a very wealthy woman who was a widow, and she became engaged to a man by the name of Yeshua ben Kamla, who was a Kohen, and she wanted him to be Kohen Gadol. So she gave a bribe to the king. It was King Yanai, not the classic King Yanai, it's a different King Yanai. She gave him a bribe, and the bribe was half a sa of gold coins. That's a fantastic amount, 72 eggs worth of gold coins in order to make him be Kohen Gadol. Now it's fascinating that the Gemara chooses this example because Yeshua ben Kamla happens to was a Talmud Chacham, and he did good things when he was a Kohen Gadol, but still he needed the bribe to get in because there were other Talmidei Chachamim who were greater than he was, but there were many who were complete Amaratzim who bribed their way into the job that the Gemara here does not mention. Okay, now the Gemara refers back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah said that we pass before him 3 types of animals. It doesn't mention Seirim. It doesn't mention the goats. Why don't we pass the goats before him? The Gemara says because we don't want him to become despairing. The goat are meant as korban chatos for all of Klal Yisrael's sins. If he sees the goat, remind him of all the averos that Klal Yisrael has done that he has to achieve atonement for, and he'll lose hope. He'll see, oh my gosh, look at the Averis Akaisa is done. How will I ever have my prayers be accepted? So Gemara says, so then how come you passed the oxen before him? Those are Karban Chatas. Those are also for Averis. Gemara says, those are Averis for himself and other Kahanim. Himself and other Kahanim, he'll know about the Averis that they did. He's aware of it, and he tells them to do tshuva, and he'll make sure that he'll do something about it. The Averis of Chayso, I can't go tell every Jew to do tshuva, and therefore he will feel like there's nothing I could do about it, and he will end up losing hope. The Gemara says, yeah, the Kohen Gadol is going to tell the Kahanim to do tshuva. That is reflection or reflected in a common proverb that people say, that if your nephew is a policeman, so don't make sure you don't cross paths with him in the street, because he knows all there is to know about you, and he'll find all kinds of ways to arrest you. Okay, the Gemara now goes back to the discussion of how much he ate. So we said that all 7 days we allowed him to eat whatever it is that he wanted. And so we bring a brisa. The brisa says Rabbi Yehuda ben Anakuzi used to say that they would feed him specifically fine flour and eggs, because these are things which would loosen the stomach, that would help him evacuate his intestines, so that he wouldn't need to use the bathroom on Yom Kippur, that wouldn't interfere with the avodah that he needed to do. The Gemara says that the Chacham said to him, no, they can't give him those foods, because those foods will bring him to arousal and may bring him to a closer state to having a seminal emission. We don't want that to happen. Now, Gemara says that Sumcha says in the name of Rabbi Meir, these are the foods we have to avoid him eating that may bring to Tumah. It's an acronym. A few versions here. Avi, Aleph Beis Yud, or Abavi, Aleph Beis Veis Yud, and also white wine. What are these acronyms? So Aleph, Beis, and Yud are Esrog, that's an Esrog. Veis is Veitzim, that's eggs, and Yud is wine. Old wine, yain yashan, and if there's a second base, that's to include basar shamein, fatty meat. You don't want them to have that as well. Also, as we said, white wine is added to the list as well. Now, on the subject of foods which bring a person to seminal emissions, the Gemara discusses a zav. A zav is somebody who had an emission similar to a seminal emission, but it's different. It looks different, and it leaves the body in a different way. And now the Brisa says that a zav who has this emission, although normally the halach is that he has to isolate himself if it flowed for 3 days, he has to isolate himself for 7 days, and he has to become clean. He has to see that there are no emissions for 7 days. If the zav ever could blame it on a particular food that he ate that may have caused it, then it's not matame him to mazav. He doesn't have to isolate himself. He doesn't have to wait shiva nikiyim, 7 clean days. And the reason is that zav is not mitame a person if it was forced, if it was caused by something. It's only if it's natural. If it's caused by some food or some activity, then it doesn't mitame tumas zav. So therefore, if you could blame it on any particular food, the Gemara says, then he doesn't have to sit shiva nikiyim. Now, the Gemara says, however, if a zav is sitting shiva nikiyim, we want to make sure not to give him food which will cause tumas keri, which will cause a real seminal emission. And the reason is that would knock out the day. If a zav who is looking for cleanliness from zav flows, if during that time he has a flow of seminal emission, of zera, of keri, that would disqualify the days. So what foods cause it? So the Gemara lists chagvi and gavam. What's chagvi? Chalav, gvina, beitza, yain. That's milk, cheese, eggs, and wine. Gavam is grisin, megrisin shall pull. The Gemara says the water of cooked beans. Basar shamein is fatty meats, and mem is murais, is cooked grain husks. Now, the Brisa also adds you should not give him any other foods which would bring to Tumah. So Gemara says, well, what does that mean? What other foods bring to Tumah? Gemara quotes a Brisa again. Gemara says there are 5 types of herbs or items that bring to Tumah, and they are as follows: garlic, shachalayim. Shachalayim is creation. An herb called chalagloiges, eggs, and an herb called gargir. Gemara says, one thing I can tell you about gargir, that's what's mentioned in a pasuk in Malachim, where it says, "Vayatza echad al sadeh lilkad oyros." Somebody went out to the field to pick oyros. Oyros is gargir. So why is oyros called? Why is gargir called oyros? The Gemara says because it's like or. It gives light. It enlightens the eyes. It's good for the eyes. And Ravuna says if somebody gets hold of some gargir, he should eat it. If he can't eat it, he should at least put it on his eyes. That'll help provide health for the eyes. Says Rav Papa, that's only if the geiger is growing on the edge of the field. If it's growing in the middle of the field amongst other plants, it loses some of its restorative powers that it has. Now, on the topic of avoiding zera emissions, the Gemara says that if somebody's visiting somebody else's house, you should take two precautions. First of all, don't eat eggs, lest he have an emission and then become embarrassed because he'll leave a stain on his host's bedclothes. And also, he should not sleep in clothing that the homeowner is going to use the next day, because then if there is a stain, he's bound to notice, and that would be a problematic situation. Now the Gemara talks about two Talmidei Chachamim who took precautions to avoid zera emissions while they were traveling. What they did was they looked for a wife for the day when they came to town. So Rav, whenever he went to the town called Darshish, where he went often, he would call out and say, "Who wants to be my wife for the day?" And he would marry her for the day, and that way he would avoid having an accidental emission. And Rav Nachman did the same thing in a town called Shachnetziv, where he went. So there's a couple of questions on this. The Gemara says, first of all, how could you just marry a woman in a certain town and then leave? That ends up that you have a wife somewhere off in a different town. We know that you're not supposed to marry two women in two different towns, because lest they not know each other. And then they'll have kids, and those kids will meet and not be aware that they're brother and sister. One as a boy, one as a girl. They're brother and sister. They won't even know about it. They may end up marrying each other. So Gemara says it's slightly different when they're Talmidei Chachamim. Everybody knows that these are the kids of the Talmud Chacham. It's a well-known thing, and therefore they will be aware when they discuss shidduchim for those kids. They'll know, oh, this is Rav's kid, this is Rav Nachman's kid, and they'll be very well aware and not end up marrying each other. It's a different problem over here. We know that the halach is that when a woman agrees to marry someone, she gets what's called a dam b'chimud. We assume that there is a blood flow of at least a drop, and she therefore has tumas nida. So what does it help for them to marry her for a day? During that one day, she'll have hilchos nida anyway. So the Gemara gives two answers. The Gemara says either they sent the message several days in advance, enough time for her to be metahar herself from that tumas nida, to go to the mikvah, or they didn't intend to do anything with them. There was no physical relationship. They just wanted to have a wife, and that they could live in the same house as without doing anything. And the reason that helped them avoid zera emissions was the concept of pas basal. If somebody has bread in the basket, it lessens the taiva that he has, and therefore it'll avoid emissions. Okay, now we begin the next Mishnah, which discusses what happens after what happened in the previous Mishnah. And it says that the Kohanim, the Kohen Agada was passed over from the care of the Ziknei Beis Din, the elders of the court, and given over to the care of the Ziknei Kahuna. And he went to them, and they said to him, Ishi Kohen Agada, my master, Kohen Agada, we are messengers of the Beis Din, and you are our messenger. You are going to perform the Avodas Yom Kippur for us. And the Beis Din people would make him swear, and they would say, we make you swear by he whose name dwells in this house, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You will not do anything different from what it says in the Torah, how you're supposed to do it. It would make him promise and swear he's going to do the Avodah of Yom Kippur correctly. The Gemara says that he would turn away and cry, and they would turn away and cry. He turned away and cried over the fact that they suspected him of being a Rasha, and they turned away and cried over the fact that they had to suspect him. Now, we wanted him to stay awake all night, and therefore, if he was a Talmid Chacham and he was able to speak, he would give a drasha about the halachos. If he wasn't able to speak, then we gave the drasha and we asked him to listen to the drasha. If he could read, if he could lean, so we asked him to lean. If not, we leaned in front of him. What do we lean? Things to keep him awake, things that would be interesting. Sefer Eov, Sefer Ezra, Divrei Yamim. The Mishnah ends off, Zechariah ben Gefutel said that I was often the one who was leaning in front of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur night, and I would read from Sefer Daniel many times.